created is to recognize that all children have special and unique gifts, and everybody deserves the care and attention of their families and communities. Early intervention plays an essential role in supporting families to ensure that all infants and toddlers have the opportunity to develop, grow, and ultimately lead productive lives in the community. So this year, our theme for Early Intervention Week is early relational health and creating connections in everyday moments. Early relational health is a term that we keep hearing more and more. What it means is really, it's just the state of emotional well-being that grows from the positive emotion connections between babies, toddlers, and their caregivers when they experience strong, positive, and nurturing relationships with each other. It's critical to creating healthy children and families and communities. So I wanted to thank you all for joining us today. On a busy Tuesday afternoon. That's beautiful outside. If you see in the chat, we are going to drop in the other virtual events that are happening this week. And then at the end of this week, early next week, we're going to be emailing out recordings of all of these presentations, as well as all the resources that were shared. So with that, I am going to introduce our speaker for this afternoon. Heidi joins us today from our Feeding Matters program, and she's going to tell us a little bit more about that. Go ahead.
Thank you, Laura, and welcome everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here. I am also a mom to a child who has special needs, and even though I'm in Arizona, we did the early intervention program, and it just sounds like you guys really have an amazing program and offer so much for families. So thank you for letting me speak and educate you on feeding matters and pediatric feeding disorder. So that being said, I am going to share my screen. And as I told Laura, Nicole, and Karen, hopefully I'll be able to stay on camera, but Zoom is very touch and go with me, where if I'm sharing my screen, it'll boot me out if I'm on camera. So that being said, I am going to share my screen, and fingers crossed. So you all can see the bright orange pediatric feeding disorder. Okay, so my name is Heidi Van Der Molen. As Laura said, I am program manager of family support at Feeding Matters. And if any of you have questions before the end of the presentation, please put them in the chat. And Laura, if you can just interrupt me and let me know, because I'll be honest, when I'm facilitating, I really don't pay attention to the chat. So that would be awesome.
You got it.
So for those of you who are unfamiliar with Feeding Matters, we are the first organization in the world uniting the field's top experts with families. And we were founded by Shannon Goldwater, whose triplets struggled. They were born premature, and they struggled with feeding since birth. She traveled out of state to multiple feeding clinics, and that was really the birth of Feeding Matters. She knew that she couldn't be facing this alone. So Feeding Matters was founded in 2006, and our mission is furthering advances in pediatric feeding disorder by accelerating identification, igniting the research, and promoting collaborative care for children and their families. Our vision is a world in which children with pediatric feeding disorder will thrive. So I'm not sure how familiar all of you are with the term failure to thrive, but so many of our families struggling, and my son included, was diagnosed with failure to thrive. So our vision is really, really important to us to recognize that our children deserve to thrive. And speaking of children, a little bit about my journey. This is my son, Hayden, and Hayden was born at 37 weeks, unscheduled C-section because he had stopped growing. We were home 3 days later, and breastfeeding really became a challenge. No matter what position I put him in, he just couldn't latch. There was no suck, swallow, breathe. And so unfortunately, at 6 days old, we ended up in the ER because he was lethargic and he went drink. And so it was really frightening for me being a first-time parent. And the next 11 days were spent inpatient, trying to, help me with breastfeeding, try to figure out what was going on with Hayden. He was so weak, they could barely put an IV in his skull, which was traumatizing. So again, spent 11 days in the hospital. We were discharged with a diagnosis of failure to thrive, which no parent enjoys hearing because it basically makes you feel like you're a failure as a mom. And that really started our journey of PFD, because my son he didn't have arches when he was born. So basically his feet were like this, which they call a rocker bottom. So we were referred to an orthopedic surgeon who referred us to a geneticist. And, that really began our journey of early intervention, therapies, surgeries, doctor's appointments. And at every appointment, I was trying to feed my son from a 2-ounce bottle from the hospital. From there on, the first 9 months, I spent pumping every 2 hours because I wanted him to have breast milk. I would try to feed him every 3 hours. And, this was exhausting. I wasn't getting any sleep. Hayden still wasn't improving. My dream of breastfeeding I had to let go of it just because, he just didn't have the muscle tone. So again, this went on for a while. It would take me an hour to get him to drink 8 ounces, and usually he was asleep. My mom, who is a retired nurse, and my son's pediatrician kept threatening, and I don't mean threatening, they just kept saying, just put in a feeding tube, it'll make it easier, just put in a feeding tube. And I didn't know anything about feeding, I was a first-time mom. I just assumed he would eat when he was hungry, breastfeeding would go well, everything would go well. So let me pause there and say, when he was 5 months old, we did get a diagnosis of 18q deletion. And that just, for those of you parents whose child does have a diagnosis, whether it's globally delayed, a chromosome disorder, or autism, cerebral palsy, when you get that diagnosis, there are so many emotions going through, like in your heart. You never dream that for your child. And for me, I was crushed, but it also made me feel relieved because under 18q deletion were all these traits that, as we go to these doctor appointments or therapies, it was like they would add something wrong with my child. And no parent wants to see in writing everything that's not typical with their child. So having the diagnosis of 18q deletion, we had early intervention started, we had therapies, but feeding for me was still the most difficult. And, again, it took me finding Feeding Matters popsicle at the time to really reaching out to families. Do you do an NG tube, which is a tube that goes through the nasal cavity and down into the stomach, or a G tube, which is placed directly into the stomach? It helped me make that decision for my child to place a tube by talking to other families and hearing firsthand their lived experience, what worked and why they chose which particular tube. And so, Feeding Matters as an organization has just really helped me and so many other families through this journey. And I can't say enough about the resources that we offer families, especially when it comes to, meal times, at least in my experience. So let me back up. The NG tube that we had placed lasted a month because if he wasn't vomiting out the tube, his cheeks were getting so rash from the tape. And so I literally, because at the time my husband was like 45 minutes away at work, my sister she worked nearby. So I would have to call my sister and have her come over, hold my son down, this tiny little infant, while I inserted the NG tube through the nasal cavity, down his esophagus, into his stomach. And then I would have to listen with a stethoscope to make sure I placed it right and I didn't place it in his lungs. So again, that lasted a month. We knew he was gaining weight. We knew he had developmental delays, that, this was going to be a long journey getting him to feed. So, we placed a G tube, and from there, we spent the next 8 years in either weekly feeding therapy. We moved to, I think he was 6 years old. We got approved at Phoenix Children's Hospital to do an intensive feeding program where we were at the hospital every day for an hour with an OT, an SLP, a GI doctor, a registered dietitian, nutritionist. And, during that time, I realized I was still that parent who just wanted him off his feeding tube. I really wanted him to eat orally. And so one of the goals we had for that intensive program is to wean him off his tube. And in order to do that, we were feeding him purees because he didn't have this, the feeding skill to chew hard solids like an apple or a pepper. And so I can't really pinpoint how I changed my mind on that, but I started to view the feeding tube as a tool. It allowed me to make all of Hayden's foods using a homemade blenderized diet of organic fruits and vegetables and grains and oils and everything healthy. And so he was thriving and staying healthy as long as we were feeding him via his G tube, which at some point he was almost 100% tube fed, but we still worked on feeding. And it just really lessened the pressure on me because I was counting calories. I was like writing down everything that he ate. And again, this went on for at least 8 years. And one thing that I really want to explain to parents, and I don't know how many of you have children with feeding tubes or have feeding issues, but there is nothing wrong with how your child is fed, whether they are completely orally fed and they only eat three types of chicken nuggets or specific brands, or if they're 100% tube fed. Fed is fed is fed. And as long as your child is growing and you have positive meal times with your child where you're listening to their cues and it's not becoming devastating for you. And, dread. I used to dread having to feed my son because if he ate orally, I was a great mom. If he refused or vomited, I was a horrible mom. And this went on. And so, my role at Feeding Matters is really to encourage parents to trust their instinct. You know your child best. If you feel that there's something wrong, then chances are there usually are. But really allow yourself grace and, just know that you know your child the best. Flash forward, because I could talk all day about my son. He is 13 and a half years old, and we still have his G tube. However, we just use it for water or the occasional medication. And while he doesn't eat 100% age appropriate food, and I still have to feed him his meals, he loves salmon. He loves turkey burgers. He loves beets and broccoli and chia pudding and vegan chocolate pudding because he has severe allergies. So we don't do milk, dairy, eggs. We love anything avocado. And, we're still working on self-feeding. And, for those of you who don't know, feeding is extremely complicated. It takes 26 muscles, 6 cranial nerves. So if you're looking at a child with CP or, doesn't have good muscle tone or trunk control, you're asking a lot of your child to not only eat age appropriate food, but to feed themselves in a, a decent amount of time, like 30 minutes, my son can eat a meal where if I allowed him to, he would eat more in 45 or 50 minutes. But then again, your days are consumed with being in the high chair or at the table with, meal times. So I just wanted to, share with you again, on the left is Hayden when he was tiny. You can see he's got bags under his eyes. He's very, very tiny. And now he is thriving. He's a happy, social little boy. And, meal times for me, I still have a little bit of PTSD, but for the most part, meal times are great. He loves to eat. He's nonverbal. So he uses a Nova Chat, which is an AAC device, to let me know his needs, his wants. So he'll tell me if he needs a drink. He'll tell me if he wants more. He'll tell me, I like this, or yuck, I don't like this. And it's just been, I'm so proud of him for everything that he has accomplished. And he is really the reason why I am so passionate of helping others through this journey, not just with feeding, but with all the challenges that our kiddos have that require a little additional therapies or support. Because I truly believe no matter what your journey or your child's diagnosis, no parent or caregiver should face this alone. So that being said, I just told you my journey with PFD, but PFD is more prevalent than autism or cerebral palsy. And so, for children without multiple complex medical needs, like my son, these children can go undiagnosed because they may look typical. And that's because their parents go through extreme measures to get their child to eat and drink and to grow. So, again, if you don't have a loved one or child who struggles with PFD, most people are unaware of how devastating it can be for not just the child, but the entire family. And again, even though PFD is more prevalent than autism or cerebral palsy, it's a relatively new standalone diagnosis. So PFD is defined as impaired oral intake that is not age appropriate and is associated with medical, nutritional, feeding skill, and psychosocial dysfunction. So imagine that your child is unable to eat or drink what they need for their body to grow. They cry, they cough, they choke, they vomit, they run from the table when you offer them food or drink. And every few hours, you try again, but something is wrong. Your child cannot eat. This is what PFD looks like. It's exhausting, it's overwhelming, and it's something that parents and caregivers face every single day and every single meal. So going back to what Feeding Matters does, we do a lot, and we're a very small staff of 7. So without our volunteers, we really wouldn't be able to accomplish nearly as much as we do and support as many families that we do. And currently, let's start with the educating professionals. Currently, there is no set certificate for a feeding specialist. So, you go to school to be an occupational therapist, you go to school to be a speech language pathologist or a registered dietitian. Well, our international conference really offers the latest research on PFD, the best practices for PFD, to educate the pediatricians who see our kids first at well-check visits, occupational therapists, SLPs, social workers, early intervention specialists. And so, this is an international conference. We just finished our 10th year, and it's really bringing together the healthcare professionals, giving them the education they need, and also supporting families and bringing the family to the front and forefront of their child's care. Because, I think I mentioned, when you have this new diagnosis or your child has all of these, you know, medical complexities going on, it's easy to forget that you know your child best, you're capable, you do the research, you do the work, you do whatever it takes to help your child. And so, you know, and I'll talk about this a little bit when we mention family support, but a lot of families just feel lost, like they don't know what to do. You know, they're not educated enough on PFD or other matters. So again, we offer education. We also have webinars. And then I'm going to briefly mention awareness and advocacy. Later in the presentation, I'll talk more about awareness because I really want to focus on the support that we offer families. And this is just, again, what does this mean for families? So I'll let you read the quote, but families are faced with fear, they're tired, they feel helpless, and they feel alone. And this is just one quote. And, you know, over the course of the 7 years that I've worked with Feeding Matters, I've spoken to over 80 parents through our Power of Two program. And I can say almost every single one of them feels this way or has some similar journey. And it, you know, again, I'll say it, I said it before, but no parent should face this journey alone. So again, supporting families is a top priority at Feeding Matters. And we were founded by Shannon's struggle to feed, you know, her children and advocate for them. So there's so many myths about, you know, pediatric feeding disorder. Our family guide has, you know, I think 8 or 10, but it's not, oh, it's a phase. Oh, he's a picky eater. He'll grow out of it. It's a power.
I can't hear you anymore. Is it just me?
Yeah, I can't hear her either.
Nope.
Can you hear me now?
Yep. Yes, it can.
That was
Perfect.
strange.
Yep.
Okay. Oh, it's my internet connection. So hopefully, fingers crossed. Okay, so I really wanted to tell you about our flagship program, the Power of Two. And you guys can still see my screen, correct? Okay. So the Power of Two is a parent-to-parent coaching program where, again, you know, PFD is a relatively new diagnosis, but families still are, you know, they're lost. So they will reach out to us on our website. We have a request support form, and through that form, they can request a one-time phone call, a 3-month match, or a 6-month match. And the great thing about this program is that our family coaches, currently we have 50 active coaches. We have 7 new families who, parents who are going through the process to become a family coach. And just having that one-to-one support with someone who understands and, you know, can offer an ear to listen to or tips and tricks that have worked for their family, as well as sharing resources, not just Feeding Matters resources, but say, Laura, you're a mom in New Jersey and you're in the early intervention program. You have all these local resources available for families that, you know, yeah, they're struggling with their child's feeding, but then usually there's like 300 diagnoses that put a child at risk for feeding. So you better believe, you know, feeding resources are not going to be the only resources that these families need. So I'm just really grateful that you guys offer so much to the families in New Jersey. So, you know, our parent coaching program, again, it's a one-time phone call or a 3-month match or a 6-month match. And during that time, our coaches will typically reach out via email to introduce themselves, to set up a time to talk. I know with modern technology, clearly, because we're all here virtually together, right? families are quick to text or, set up a Zoom, a FaceTime or whatever. But I personally, I'm old school. I love to talk on the phone where I don't have to see myself in a little Zoom screen, but just really having that one-to-one connection, hearing about another mom's journey and offering them that support and giving them their confidence back. I mean, I'll be honest, I felt like a horrible mom the first 12 months of my son's life. And all I ever wanted to do was be a mom. I never dreamed that we would be in this journey. And I didn't have, peer-to-peer mentoring, but what I did do was I surrounded myself, and this was at the Foundation for Blind Children, where my son went to an infant program. I surrounded myself with moms who were further in the journey, who could tell me, what do I need to do with feeding? What do I need to do with PT? What kind of wheelchair do you have? Or what, tools do you use for feeding? Or what kind of cup? Or what kind of sensory toys do you have? Really embracing the community that had become my life, my village. And again, sometimes that's hard to do. Families they're overwhelmed. Whether you're working full time or if you had to quit your job to care for your child, you have a spouse, you have elderly parents that you're taking care of. I get it. We're busy. So a lot of times families, they need the support, but it's a hard time actually talking to someone about it because, usually when parents reach out to us, they are desperate and they are overwhelmed. And a lot of times they're in the hospital with their child because their child has malnutrition or stopped drinking. And so they need, to stay hydrated. So the Power of Two is really, it's life-changing for families who really don't have a huge support system. And, again, I have a huge family. My mom was a retired nurse. She would take over feeding my son. Everyone was really empathetic, but they didn't have that firsthand experience, and I'm grateful, like no one ever told me, oh, you're imagining it. Oh, you're a helicopter mom, just he'll eat when he's hungry. No one ever said that to me, but families are still being judged. And so they're afraid to come forward that their child is struggling, and they will do, again, drastic measures. They'll feed him in their sleep. They'll chase him around the house all day long. They'll let him graze. Anything to get their child to thrive and to either avoid a feeding tube or really let people know just how hard it is. And so, I just wanted to say the Power of Two program is one of our major family support programs. It's not the only one, but it is one that is really dear and near to my heart. So this is Panali and her son, Shiv. Panali reached out to us, I want to say back in 2017. Shiv was struggling. He was born at 37 weeks, just like my son, and he really struggled with feeding. So she had an NG tube placed for, I want to say, a couple of years. And throughout that time, Panali's in New Jersey. Robin, I believe, was in Pennsylvania. And I was able to match the two of them. And Panali, she literally had to quit her job. She was a pharmacist, and her days were consumed with taking care of Shiv, managing the NG tube, going to doctor's appointments. But having the support from Robin really got her through this journey. And currently, and I think she's been a family coach for a couple of years now, Panali is able to give back to the community and help other families in New Jersey and not just New Jersey. We have family coaches around the world because, as you know, pediatric feeding disorder is just not in New Jersey or in Arizona. It is everywhere internationally. So, and bear with me, I'm going to try to get this video to play. So if you can't hear it, Laura, just give me a shout out. This is Virginia, one of our mentees. And then on the right is a quote from her family coach.
My name is Virginia and my daughter's name is Charlotte. And back when Charlotte was only a few months old, I noticed that something wasn't right. She was having a lot of difficulties taking the bottle or breastfeeding. And things got progressively worse to the point that we ended up in the children's hospital because she completely refused to eat at all. And the doctors were pushing for feeding tubes, and I just felt so incredibly alone. I was afraid and scared, and honestly felt like I did not have the resources I needed, despite being in a hospital. So I started doing research online, and by the grace of God, I found the Feeding Matters website. I filled out a contact form, and within the hour, I was contacted by a wonderful woman who spent so much time learning about my situation and my daughter. And she recommended the Power of Two program. And we were matched almost immediately to a wonderful, wonderful woman named Melissa. And Melissa's daughter has been through many of the same feeding issues and difficulties as my daughter. And just having her as that resource to know she understands that I'm not alone. She's there to talk to whenever I need someone. It's amazing. I can honestly say that when my daughter was going through this, it was without a doubt the darkest time of my life. I spent almost every day crying and feeling extremely alone. But having Melissa there, she would call me, she would text me, she even would send me cards in the mail. Having that resource, I just cannot express in words how comforting it was. She encouraged me. It made things so much better. And I felt like I finally had someone who understood and the support that I needed. And my daughter is now 11 months old. Her feeding issues are not resolved, but again, I have a wonderful resource through Feeding Matters and through Melissa, where I don't feel alone anymore. I feel like I have the support that I need and the encouragement that I need. And I have hope. And with that, I just cannot say enough wonderful things about Feeding Matters and all that they do for parents and their children. Just an invaluable resource. I have so much gratitude and thanks for that.
I love what she says, and she just was so incredible. So I'd like to, and Laura, you tell me, I think I'm doing okay on time. We've got.
Good.
Okay.
Yeah, we got about 20 minutes.
Okay. So some of our resources that we have, the infant and child feeding questionnaire can be located on our website, feedingmatters.org. It is an online screening tool, and these 6 questions, they're subset questions of the actual feeding questionnaire. If 2 or more are red flags, that is predictive of a PFD. So if your child is struggling with feeding, but you're not sure if there's, an actual PFD diagnosis, I highly recommend answering these 6 questions. If 2 or more turn up the orange flags, then have a conversation with your child's pediatrician, because they can better refer you to either an evaluation, a GI doctor, ENT, feeding therapy. So again, this is the full questionnaire can be taken online, and you can print it or you can email it directly to your child's pediatrician or your child's therapist for that matter. The family guide to PFD, again, all of the resources that I'm mentioning can be located on our website. And the family guide is really, it goes over sort of PFD 101, because PFD can be very complex, as can any diagnosis. So we didn't want to overwhelm parents. We really wanted to educate them on the 4 domains of PFD, which is the medical, the feeding skill, the nutritional, and the psychosocial. And then again, it has myths and signs and and tips from families who have been through this journey. And, they want to offer advice and help to families that are struggling. Our Learning Center has free webinars for families. And I'm going to apologize right now because these recommended webinars, our Learning Center is actually under construction because we're moving platforms from Teachable to our own website. So if you're interested in any of these workshops, please contact me directly and I can, I'll put my email in the chat, or Laura, if you would be able to take care of that, that would be awesome. We're hoping to get it up in the next week or so, but I just wanted you to be aware. Food is Sensory by Marcia Duncline is a great one. Picky Eating versus PFD versus ARFID by Kay Toomey is another great one. I don't know how many of you are familiar with ARFID, but ARFID is avoidant restrictive food intake disorder. And again, it's relatively new like PFD, but there are subtle differences where with ARFID, it's not an eating disorder, but the child is afraid to eat. There's high anxiety. They have limited food preference. And so, we have more on our website about the difference between ARFID. And right now, what we feel is that ARFID, because the child is typically older, experienced a choking episode, ARFID is typically a child who had PFD early on, but was undiagnosed. And so when looking at the two diagnoses, PFD, as I mentioned, has the 4 domains. So medical is looked at, nutrition, feeding skill, and psychosocial. With ARFID, it's typically the psychologist, that behavioral aspect where, some of the kids who've been diagnosed with ARFID have actually had EOE undiagnosed or gastroparesis. And so it's really important to always look at that medical piece before any of the other domains. And then the other 2 workshops, food allergies, feeding issues, and EOE is another good one by Bethany. And I apologize, I can't remember her last name at the moment. And then my dear friend, Heather Joy Magdaleno's office hours, exploring ways to nurture our own resilience. And I will say Heather Joy, her 2 kids have the same chromosome disorder and they're best friends with my son. She has just such an amazing way about her, a calming effect, strength that, I'm sure all of you didn't think you had this strength to raise your child, but I highly recommend watching that one. And then our resource library, we have been putting out blogs, family stories, educational blogs. We have videos, recipes. So if you're looking for a high calorie food or a healthy snack, you can go to the recipes section. We have templates. So if you're in need of medical necessity equipment, you can look at the templates and just, download it, add your information. And then again, articles, books, and products. Social media, we do, we have Facebook, we have Instagram, Twitter. I will say, going back to the power of 2, we do have a closed Facebook group for the mentees and the family coaches. And I believe we have 160 members. So again, it's just another place to connect or post a question. If you have a child who only eats a certain brand and you can't find that brand anymore, other parents are really great about offering tips that have worked for them. We also have our PFD Alliance app, which is relatively new. We launched it last year at our conference. And so the PFD Alliance app is really great because you can connect with healthcare professionals, families. We have additional resources there. So you'll have the PFD ICD-10 toolkit, the family guide. And it's just great to really connect with other moms who get it and the healthcare professionals who work so hard to support, these infants and children and their families. And then lastly, I would like to mention that May is PFD Awareness Month. And currently we have 15 states who recognize PFD Awareness Month. So we have 15 proclamations. And Thursday, our CEO, Jacqueline Peterson, will be meeting with our governor of Arizona, a meet and greet to tell him about PFD. And New Jersey is one of the states, I believe, that we got proclamation. So again, if you'd like to learn more about this, go to our website. We share a 5-minute video of real families and what they go through. We have video clips of our kids, a lot of staff members' kids, and it's a way to really bring awareness, so feel free to share this, feel free to join the fundraiser, or, tell a friend about PFD, because chances are someone you talk to who had not otherwise known about PFD is probably knows someone who has a child with PFD or a loved one. And that pretty much concludes the presentation. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I just want to thank you all so much for hanging in there. I don't know how many people we lost, but I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Well, I want to say thank you too. That was inspiring too. And I think a lot of things that our families struggle with is feeling really alone in a lot of these things. So to hear somebody that's going through it or has went through it is really helpful for, everybody. So I want to just thank you for coming and sharing information with us.
Yeah, thank you, Laura.
No problem. So does anybody have questions?
I have a question. Well, first, I want to echo what Laura said. Thank you so much for coming on and for educating us and sharing your story. I think that it's incredibly inspiring, and it just brings, I don't know how many are present here that are working in early intervention. Hopefully there's many practitioners. I think that sometimes they need to be reminded that although we're going into people's homes with the best intention and leading with wanting to help, that there's still a lot of feelings that the families are struggling with, that contributes to their participation, lack thereof, etc. So it's important to kind of be reminded of, no matter how excited we are and all the tools that we have to share and our willingness to help, that still we have to meet the family where they are, and that understanding their journey and how they're feeling does impact the work that we do. So thank you for that. And I wanted to ask, Heidi, did you become a professional after having your child in this?
Yes. So Arizal, am I pronouncing your first name properly?
Yes. People don't usually get it on the first try, so kudos to that.
So before my son was born, I actually was the education director at a national art school. That's what I went to school for. I got my bachelor's in illustration. I had my artwork in galleries. When my son was born, everything changed, especially, when we got his diagnosis. So it was really then that I had to stop working. I stopped painting, and my entire life was all about my son, Hayden. And when he hit preschool, I realized, look, I'm not getting any younger. I want to contribute because I've always been very work oriented. I want to feel like I'm contributing financially. So it just turns out I had done a lot of volunteering with Feeding Matters. I spoke at their second community luncheon, shared my story with Hayden. And then as I realized I need to go back to work, I couldn't just go back to, working at an art school, or I just knew I needed to make a difference, right? I mean, all of you must have a similar story where, you have a loved one, or you want to make a difference in this world. You want to help people through a difficult journey. And so it just so happened, I think I was at Feeding Matters office doing a training as a volunteer, and mentioned to Jacqueline and Chris, the CEO at the time, and Jacqueline's the current CEO, that I was looking for a job, and I updated my resume, and it was pretty much Feeding Matters, Feeding Matters, Feeding Matters. So long story short, I was hired 7 years ago, back in 2015. And it has been such an incredible joy meeting all of the incredible people who work in early intervention, who, you know, the therapists that help these families through this journey. And most importantly, connecting with the moms and the family coaches who, you know, PFD is up and down. I'm not going to lie. Like, I'm in a great place now with my son, but who knows what the next month will be, or, you know, if he gets COVID and ends up stops eating. So again, sorry for being winded, but I had no experience in this prior to my son, but I'm so grateful.
Yeah, I asked because I worked with a family that has a child with Charge syndrome, and one of the struggles was just being able to identify practitioners that even knew what the syndrome was. So we didn't, so many people wanted to help, but they felt very helpless. And then the family felt very hopeless because they just felt like every time that they went to a different system, it was still the same thing, that they were able to be helped in one capacity, but still there was a deficit in another. And I'm finding that, a lot of the times families, because of the limited resources, when they were encountering their own struggles, they end up in becoming a professional like you, because they felt like they didn't have the support and they want to be able to support in the future. So thank you for that. And I did have another question. I am a program manager for one of the agencies that provides early intervention services. And I am noticing that each early intervention, excuse me, I'm sorry, I'm in a meeting. Sorry. In every early intervention program in each state varies. And I know that in New Jersey, we don't necessarily, our practitioners don't address feeding concerns. We may oversee some of the concerns and provide assistance and support whenever we can, but it's considered more of a family goal than it is a child outcome. And but there are some practitioners with, all the changes that have happened. I'm so sorry, my little one is adding to the, some practitioners that have worked in this field in other states that are moving into New Jersey, have experience working directly and are able to, in those states that they're coming from, work directly with Feeding Matters, but that's not the case for New Jersey. So when you mentioned that your organization provides training, how do you kind of, guide those states that are not allowed to kind of, provide the same level of support as other states that can work directly with feeding concerns? Like, what kind of guidance can we give?
So we actually have an early intervention page on our website, because we realize that in many states, Arizona included, feeding is not a related service. So, you've got the 4 diagnoses. Feeding is not one of those. And what's happening is a lot of people in the early intervention have limited experience in feeding therapy. So again, we offer our conference. We have webinars on training. We'll do lunch and learns with home visitors where, again, we have, and I mentioned the 6 questions that families can fill out. As a home visitor or an early intervention person, you can share the when to refer wrap card with families. It has the 6 questions, and then on the back, it has the signs and symptoms. So really having a conversation with a parent who, maybe their child is struggling, but you don't know, and how to better identify. And even if you can't offer feeding therapy, you can direct them to us so that we can get them hooked up with a family coach, or at least share our provider directory, which hosts over 800 providers throughout the US and abroad, where if they need a feeding therapist, they can utilize that by plugging in their zip code and distance willing to travel.
Thank you so much. You were amazing.
Thank you for the questions and for all you do. So can I ask a quick question, Laura? how many are families, parents, and how many are actually EI specialists?
No, that's a great question. I believe we asked that when we signed up. Let me look. Give me a second.
Because I mean, I would love, if anyone has any additional questions or, after this, please do not hesitate to contact me. And, I'm happy to send you our when to refer rec cards or direct you to additional digital resources. And I really appreciate all of your time. Thank you for that.
I appreciate you being here. I'm looking right now. We had signed up 41 parents or caregivers, 12 EI professionals, 7 or both, and 7 other signed up. So
Nice.
we recorded this and it will go to everybody that registered of this group. Now that questionnaire, if your child is 2 and you're not sure if they're a picky eater or if there's something more, that's what families would use.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. I highly recommend it. Again, we're working with a pilot program with one of the pediatricians here in Phoenix, where he's passing out the questionnaire to parents while they're in the waiting room, so that we can better identify that and really make a referral to early intervention, even though every state doesn't, feeding doesn't qualify them, but we're hoping that it will eventually, working with, that's part of our advocacy program, to ensure that feeding does get identified early and is part of early intervention. So
That's fantastic. All right, well, we'll stay on for a few more minutes if anybody has any other questions. But if you don't, thank you so much for coming. We have another presentation tomorrow night about challenging behaviors. And we look forward to seeing you throughout the rest of the week with all our virtual presentations and in person.
Laura, there is a question.
Yes,
in
the chat.
in the
from
chat
Jennifer,
from
you.
Jennifer. Mhm.
would you
Heidi.
encourage any parent with a question or concern wondering about feeding? Yes, I definitely would encourage, even if it's just like one concern. I highly recommend parents talking to their pediatrician, because it's better to be proactive than wait and see. And a lot of parents are being told, oh, just wait and see, he'll grow out of it, or it's a phase. Always trust your instincts. So yes, I would share the 6 subset questions with that parent. And of course, direct them to me or Feeding Matters, and I'm happy to walk them through that as well. You're welcome, Jennifer. Thanks for the question.
Thank you.